first thing I noticed was the smoke. Thick, acrid, curling into the twilight sky in great twisting plumes. The second thing I noticed was the bodies. Some human, some not. The battlefield stretched out before me like the shattered remains of a civilization no one would bother to remember. Fires flickered in the distance, turning the wreckage into a graveyard of steel and blood. And then there was her, Kelia of the Vareth. She stood in the center of it all, her long ears twitching in the cold wind, her violet eyes scanning the ruins like a predator considering its next meal. She was as still as a statue, her battle-worn armor gleaming beneath the dim light of the planet's fractured moon. Her blade, an elegant thing that hummed with plasma energy, was still ignited, casting a ghostly glow across her face. It was one thing to hear stories about the infamous Kelia. It was another thing entirely to stand in front of her, unarmed, and realize you had absolutely no idea whether she was going to run you through or let you keep breathing. "You're the last one," she said, voice edged with something I couldn't quite place. I held up my hands not because I thought surrendering would actually work, but because at this point I had very few survival options left. "Great. Love that from me." Her ears twitched again. "You're human." "Last time I checked." She tilted her head, studying me with something disturbingly close to curiosity. "Then why aren't you afraid?" "Oh, I am," I assured her. "I'm just too tired to show it." Something flickered across her face, an expression so fleeting I couldn't decipher it before it was gone. Then she took a step closer, and I instinctively took a step back, my boot crunching against the rubble beneath me. She had the grace of a warrior bred for battle, the kind of fluid movement that came with a lifetime of knowing exactly how to kill anything that stood in her way. "You're the only one left," she repeated, softer this time. "The rest of your squad is dead." I clenched my jaw. "Yeah, thanks for the recap." She let out a breath, not quite a sigh, not quite an exhale, but something tired, something human, despite everything she was. And then, in a voice barely above a murmur, she said, "You are the only one who understands me, human." I stared at her, blinked, stared some more. Finally, I said, "Okay, that is not where I thought this was going." She frowned. "What?" I gestured vaguely. "I figured you were about to, end me, not drop some existential confession on me." Her eyes narrowed slightly, and for a second, I was pretty sure she was going to kill me. But instead, she simply deactivated her blade with a soft hiss. The battlefield around us was eerily quiet now, just the distant crackling of fire and the occasional creak of twisted metal. "I should kill you," she said, as if she were debating whether to order dessert at a restaurant. "Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that plan." Her lips quirked, not quite a smirk, but close enough to make me nervous. "You're strange, human." "Thanks, I work hard at it." Another pause. Another moment where I tried to figure out if I was about to die. Then unexpectedly, she sighed. "Come with me," I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "You want to survive, don't you?" "Typically, yeah." "Then follow me," she said simply, already turning away, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. I hesitated. It wasn't like I had a lot of choices. My ship was a smoldering wreck. My squad was gone. And the odds of surviving alone in enemy territory were roughly equivalent to the odds of a black hole not sucking up everything in its path. Still, following the infamous Kelia of the Vareth felt like the kind of decision that ended with my body being dumped into deep space. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked as I jogged to catch up. "Away from here," she said cryptically. "Wow, super helpful." She shot me a sharp look, and I shut my mouth. The thing about Kelia, the thing that had made her a legend on both sides of the war, was that she didn't just win battles. She ended them, quickly, efficiently. She was the kind of warrior whose name was spoken in hushed tones, the kind of enemy that made even the most hardened soldiers rethink their life choices. And yet, as we weaved through the wreckage of the battlefield, I couldn't help but notice how tired she looked, how her shoulders sagged ever so slightly, how her steps, while still graceful, were heavier than they should have been. She was running on empty. I said, trying to fill the silence, "if this is some elaborate ploy to lull me into a false sense of security before you murder me, I gotta say, it's working." She huffed. If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. Comforting. Silence stretched between us. Eventually, I dared to ask, so, that whole "you're the only one who understands me" thing, what was that about? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stopped walking and turned to face me fully. The fires of the battlefield reflected in her violet eyes, turning them molten. I meant what I said, she murmured. You're different. Not like the others. I frowned. You don't know me. I know enough, she said simply. I wasn't sure what unnerved me more, that she believed that, or that some part of me wanted to believe it too. Before I could press further, a distant whirring sound filled the air. At first, I thought it was just the wind howling through the wreckage. But then Kelly's ears twitched, her entire body going rigid. Drop, she ordered. I had enough sense not to argue this time. We hit the ground just as something streaked overhead, a sleek black drone scanning the wreckage for survivors. Kelly cursed under her breath. They're looking for us. Us? I echoed. Pretty sure I am the only one who's supposed to be dead right now. She shot me a look. Not anymore. Something about the way she said that sent a shiver down my spine, because for the first time I realized that Kelia of the Vareth, Galaxy's most feared warrior, was also on the run, and somehow I had just become her only ally. The problem with running for your life is that it's surprisingly exhausting. I don't just mean the whole dodging drones and trying not to die thing. I mean everything. The running, the hiding, the constant anxiety of wondering whether you're about to step on something explosive. It wears on you. Not to mention my unexpected traveling companion wasn't exactly great at pep talks. We need to move faster, Kelia muttered, her violet eyes scanning the ruins around us. Her long ears twitched like a sensor array, picking up on every distant noise. I had no idea how she wasn't completely winded. She hadn't so much as broken a sweat. Meanwhile, I was pretty sure my lungs were trying to leave my body out of protest. This is me moving faster, I wheezed. My cardio routine went out the airlock years ago. She gave me a look, half exasperated, half assessing. How are your people still in this war? Mostly luck, I admitted. That and a deep burning desire to annoy literally everyone we meet. Kelia didn't smile, but I swore I saw the smallest flicker of amusement in her eyes. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to enjoy my minor victory because, at that exact moment, a bright red light cut through the smog-filled sky. A drone, searching, hunting. I barely had time to swear before Kelia grabbed my arm and yanked me into the wreckage of a downed ship. We pressed ourselves into the shadows, the metal around us still warm from recent fires. The drone hovered past, scanning the debris with an eerie mechanical hum. For a long, breathless moment, we stayed perfectly still, watching as its crimson sensor light flicked across the battlefield. Then finally it moved on. I let out a slow, controlled exhale. Okay, love that. That was great. Let's never do that again. Kelia released my arm, her grip lingering just a second longer than necessary. They're tightening their search grid. We don't have much time before they start finding bodies. Finding our bodies, you mean? I muttered. That's a little more personal. She ignored that, peering out from behind our cover. We need to find transport. Agreed, because I don't think my boots are rated for forever travel. She glanced down at my scuffed, battered military-grade boots, then at her own sleek, alien armor. I couldn't be sure, but I think she was judging me. Finally, she nodded toward the horizon. There's an old supply outpost near the canyon ridge. If the war hasn't completely gutted it, we might find something functional. Define functional, I said warily, as in, it moves. Great. Love that confidence. She turned, already moving, expecting me to follow, which of course I did, because what else was I supposed to do? Politely tell her I had other plans? We moved quickly, keeping low to the ground. The battlefield stretched around us in eerie silence, broken only by the distant sound of dying machinery and the occasional burst of static from long-dead radios. The sky above was a sickly gray, the air thick with the scent of scorched metal and burnt fuel. This planet, whatever it had been before the war, wasn't going to survive much longer. We walked in silence for a while. Then, because I apparently couldn't help myself, I asked, So, Kelia, do you, often tell random humans that they understand you, or am I just special? She didn't slow down, didn't even look at me, but I did see the slightest twitch of her long ears. I was tired, she said simply. I raised an eyebrow. That's your excuse? It's not an excuse, she said, still not looking at me. It's a fact. For a while, I thought that was all she was going to say, but then after a long pause, she added, You asked if I often say things like that to humans? The answer is no. There was something strange in her voice, something I couldn't quite pin down. I guess I should be honored then, I said. She made a quiet noise, almost like a huff of air. You should be concerned. Before I could ask what that was supposed to mean, we reached the edge of the canyon ridge. Below us, nestled against the jagged rocks, was the outpost, or what was left of it. The structure had seen better days. Its metal walls were scorched and dented, half of its roof had caved in, and there were clear signs that someone, probably scavengers, had already picked it over. But the landing pad? That was still mostly intact. And on that landing pad sat an old battered ship. It was ugly, rusted, looked like it might explode if you sneezed too hard. But it was a ship. Kelly studied it for a long moment, then glanced at me. You any good at piloting? I mean, define good. She started walking toward the ship. Wait, that wasn't an answer, I hissed, scrambling after her. We approached cautiously, keeping close to the shadows. The outpost was too quiet. No movement, no signs of life. And that's when I noticed the bodies, a handful of them, scattered near the entrance, scavengers judging by their gear. Their weapons were still clutched in cold fingers, their faces frozen in expressions of shock. I swallowed hard. Okay, so, maybe the ship isn't unoccupied. Kalia's expression didn't change. Stay behind me. You do realize I was going to do that anyway, right? She didn't answer, just drew her weapon and stepped forward. The ship's ramp was partially open, its interior dark. She gestured for me to cover her as she moved inside, which was hilarious because I was still unarmed, but sure. Moral support. I was great at moral support. The interior of the ship was worse than I expected. Panels had been torn open, wires were exposed, and there was a distinct smell of something burning. Not ideal. But then Kalia spotted the controls. She moved to them, fingers trailing over the battered console. After a moment, the screen flickered to life. It still works, she murmured. I let out a breath. Okay, that's shockingly good news. She turned to me, eyes sharp. Then let's not waste time. I hesitated, staring at her. She was really doing this, taking a ship, taking me with her. And for the first time since this whole disaster started, I realized that whatever was happening here, whatever this was between us, was bigger than just survival. I was officially in way over my head. The ship rattled like an old tin can in a hurricane. I clutched the armrests of my seat and tried very, very hard not to say anything that might distract the person currently keeping us from plummeting to our fiery deaths. Is it supposed to sound like that? I asked finally, as another whirring groan shuddered through the hull. Kalia, seated at the pilot's controls, didn't look up. The ship is operational. Complaints are unnecessary. Operational and falling apart aren't mutually exclusive, I muttered. I feel like we should have a third option here. She flicked a switch and the ship gave a noise that could only be described as a wheeze. Stop talking, she said. Sure, yeah, no problem, I agreed. Just gonna sit here and accept my fate in absolute silence. The ship bucked as we broke through the lower atmosphere. Heat shimmered across the viewport, and for a moment, I really did wonder if we were about to become a new crater on the surface of this already war-torn planet. Then suddenly, the turbulence stopped. The roar of the ship's thrusters smoothed into a steady hum, and the darkness of space opened up around us. Kelia exhaled through her nose, adjusting the controls with smooth, practiced movements. We are clear. I unclenched my fingers from the armrests. Ha, see? That wasn't terrifying at all. Kelia didn't even glance at me. You were making noises. I frowned. What kind of noises? She was silent for a moment, then flatly. Small, distressed human noises. I groaned and leaned back in my seat. Great, that's just what my self-esteem needed. Kelia ignored me, her focus already on the nav system. The old ship had a basic star chart, but half the routes were outdated, and the fuel readings were questionable at best. I cleared my throat. So, do we actually have a destination, or are we just flying into the void and hoping for the best? Kelly's fingers paused over the controls. Then slowly she turned to look at me. I assumed you had a plan, she said. I blinked. Why the hell would you assume that? You are the one who understands me, are you not? She said dryly. I gaped at her. That was your line. You're the one who said it. She tilted her head slightly, ears twitching. And yet, here you are. I pointed a finger at her. Okay, first of all, rude. Second, you hijacked this ship, which makes you the captain by default. Congratulations. I expect a steady salary and weekends off. Kelly didn't react. But after a pause, she turned back to the console and tapped in a series of coordinates. The screen flickered, and a new path lit up across the star chart. We need to resupply, she said. There is a neutral trading station in the outer rings of the Perseid cluster. We will go there. I frowned. Neutral station? You sure about that? Because I don't know if you've noticed, but you're kind of, famous. Kelly's expression remained unreadable. I have contacts. I let out a slow breath. Right. Of course you do. Because why wouldn't the galaxy's most dangerous warrior have a bunch of convenient contacts? She glanced at me just briefly. Would you rather try our luck on a military-controlled world? I immediately threw my hands up. Nope. Neutral station sounds great. Love a good neutral station. She nodded, satisfied, and locked in the course. As the ship's autopilot engaged, the worn-out vessel lurched forward, aligning itself with the distant stars. The hum of the engines settled into something almost peaceful, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I let myself relax. Just a little. The silence stretched between us. Not awkward exactly. Just there. So, I said finally, this is the part where we bond, right? Kelly gave me a blank look. You know, I continued, long journey through space, just the two of us. This is usually where people start sharing deep, meaningful conversations about their tragic past. Kelly's expression didn't change. I raised an eyebrow. Nothing? No dramatic backstory? I was raised for war, she said simply. Trained from childhood. Fought my first battle before I had seen a full cycle of my homeworld's moons. I blinked. Okay, so that's pretty tragic. She shrugged. It is what it is. I drummed my fingers against my armrest. All right, follow-up question. Ever do anything not related to war? Her ears twitched slightly. I read. That caught me off guard. Wait, seriously? Kelly's gaze flicked to me, like she wasn't sure why that of all things surprised me. Yes. I leaned forward. Okay, what do you read? Like ancient battle strategies? Tactical manuals? She hesitated, just slightly. Some, she admitted. I squinted at her. That sounded suspicious. Another pause. Then so quiet I almost didn't hear it. Poetry. I stared at her. She looked away as if regretting answering at all. Oh my God, I whispered. You're secretly a poetry nerd. Kelly scowled. It is a cultural art form. Many of my people study it. I grinned. Yeah, sure. Poetry. She shot me a glare that could have melted steel. I held up my hand, still grinning. Hey, no judgment. I just didn't peg you as the romantic verse type. I did not say it was romantic, she muttered. I smirked. So, it is romantic? Kelly turned back to the console. I regret speaking. I laughed, leaning back in my seat. Nah, you're stuck with me now, warrior poet. She didn't respond. But as the ship hurtled through the void, I swore I saw the smallest, tiniest hint of a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I thought, maybe, just maybe, this whole accidental alliance thing wasn't going to be so bad after all. The trading station was exactly what you'd expect from a place that called itself neutral, which was to say it was a lawless, barely held together mess of metal platforms, flickering neon signs, and an overwhelming smell of something that I could only describe as fried despair. The Perseid cluster's infamous Outpost 11 wasn't so much a station as it was an accident that refused to die. Built from old mining rigs and abandoned warships, it clung to the edge of a dying star system like some kind of stubborn space barnacle, attracting smugglers, mercenaries, and traders who all shared one thing in common: They weren't particularly welcome anywhere else. So naturally, Kellia walked in like she owned the place. Her long ears twitched as we stepped onto the main concourse, eyes scanning the crowd with sharp precision. She was trying to look casual, but it was kind of difficult when she radiated the exact same energy as an apex predator walking into a petting zoo. I tried to keep up, tugging my jacket tighter around me. So when you said you had contacts here, did you mean the kind that won't shoot us on sight, or? Kellia didn't slow her pace. I meant the kind that will listen before deciding whether to shoot us. Oh, fantastic. Love that. We wove through the crowd, passing vendors, selling everything from stolen military tech to food that may or may not have once been classified as alive. The neon-lit signs overhead flickered between a dozen different alien languages, advertising services that range from legitimate repairs to, well, things I wasn't about to ask about. Kellia finally stopped outside a small, rusted shop wedged between two larger structures. The sign above the door read, Faro's Parts and Provisions in a flickering, half-broken script. This is it, she said. I eyed the shop. Looks cozy. Kellia ignored me and stepped inside. The moment we entered, a mechanical voice chirped. Weapons must remain holstered while in Faro's. Any attempt to... Kellia reached up and flicked a switch near the entrance. The voice cut off mid-sentence. A low, annoyed groan echoed from behind the cluttered counter. I told you to stop doing that. The shop's owner, a short, stout alien with 4 arms and the temperament of an overworked bartender, leaned over his counter and squinted at us. His skin was a mottled shade of blue-green, and he had the kind of face that suggested he had long since stopped caring about anything. Kellia, he grumbled, you're supposed to be dead. Kellia crossed her arms. Disappointed? Faro snorted. Not in the slightest. Just means I owe someone 50 credits. He leaned forward, squinting at me. And who's this? Your new pet? I placed a hand over my heart. Wow. Love the warm welcome. Kellia ignored both of us. We need supplies, fuel, rations, and a replacement for the ship's primary stabilizer. Faro whistled. Sounds like you're holding that thing together with sheer determination. It flies. For now. Kellia gave him a look. Can you help us or not? Faro sighed and rubbed his forehead with one of his 4 hands. I've got the rations. The fuel's expensive, but I can get it. The stabilizer might be trickier. Kellia's eyes narrowed. Meaning the only one I've got in stock is already spoken for. I groaned. Let me guess. You could sell it to us for a small additional fee? Faro grinned, sharp teeth flashing. See? I like this one. Kellia did not look amused. I leaned against the counter. All right, Faro. What's it going to take? The little alien tapped his fingers against the surface, considering. Tell you what, there's a guy down in the lower levels, calls himself Nax, owes me a lot of money. You get my credits from him, and the stabilizer's yours. I exhaled slowly. That sounds like a great way to get stabbed. Faro shrugged. Only if you're bad at it. I looked at Kellia. This is the part where you say we're not doing this and you magically find a better plan, right? Kellia was already turning toward the door. Let's go. Unbelievable, I muttered, following after her. The lower levels of Outpost 11 were worse than the upper ones, which was honestly impressive. The air smelled like burnt metal and engine grease, and the lighting was barely functional, casting everything in flickering half-shadows. We found Nax in what could generously be described as a bar. Less generously, it was a leaking metal room where people drank questionable liquid out of even more questionable containers. Nax himself was a tall, wiry alien with too many eyes and not enough patience. He took one look at us and immediately frowned. I don't have Faro's money, he said. Wow, I said. Not even a hello? Kellia stepped forward, voice calm but firm. You have 2 choices, pay your debt or give us something of equal value. Nax narrowed his eyes. Or? Kellia tilted her head. There is no or. Nax snorted. You think I'm scared of you? Kellia didn't answer. She just reached out, grabbed the nearest chair, and, without even looking, crushed it between her fingers like it was made of cheap plastic. Nax's expression flickered. Okay, he said slowly. That's mildly concerning. I grinned. You should see what she does to actual threats. Nax muttered something under his breath, then reached into his jacket and tossed a small data chip onto the table. Fine, there. Transfer key. It's all I've got. Kellia picked it up, examined it, then nodded. Good choice. Nax scowled. Yeah, get out of here. We didn't need to be told twice. Farah was waiting when we got back. He scanned the chip, grinned, and tossed the stabilizer onto the counter. Pleasure doing business. Kellia grabbed the part, nodding once. We are leaving. I exhaled. Finally. As we stepped back onto the station's main level, I shot Kellia a sideways glance. You really crushed that chair just for intimidation? She didn't answer. I frowned. Wait. Did you not know it was that fragile? Still, she said nothing. I stared at her. Finally, she muttered, It was poorly constructed. I snorted. Unbelievable. She kept walking, and despite everything, I found myself smiling as I followed her. The journey back to the ship was uneventful, which was honestly a small miracle given the chaos that seemed to follow Kellia and me around like a bad smell. We made it through the lower levels of Outpost 11 without being attacked, shot at, or even yelled at, which, considering we had just threatened a guy for money, was borderline impressive. The ship, as expected, was still hovering in its rather suspicious state. Suspicious because it was mostly held together by duct tape and untested optimism. But the stabilizer was in place, and that was something. The rations were stocked, the fuel tanks were full enough to keep us flying for a while, and Kellia was already muttering something about recalibrating the navigation systems. All right, I said, settling into my seat. So now what? Are we going to sit here and pretend everything's fine until the ship explodes, or... Kellia didn't even look up. We will not be waiting for that. Good to know. I leaned back in the chair, tapping my fingers against the armrest. So, any idea where we're going next? Kellia's expression remained unchanged. We are heading to the Tempest Nebula. I blinked. That's, somewhere between dangerous and why are you still talking about this? She glanced at me briefly. It is a strategic location, a place to regroup and plan our next move. Oh, so it's like a danger zone kind of thing. I leaned forward. You know, I was really hoping you'd say, let's go to a luxury resort on an ice planet or something. But no. Just, more danger. Kellia's eyes flicked toward me with that dangerous gleam. If you're that uncomfortable, I can always drop you off at the nearest colony. I threw up my hands in mock horror. And leave me at the mercy of what? A bunch of over-caffeinated farmers? No thanks. I'll take my chances with the nebula. She let out a sound that could have been mistaken for a sigh if you didn't know better. She was clearly done with me, but I wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. I glanced out the viewport, where the dark expanse of space stretched before us like an endless ocean of nothing. The stars were distant pinpricks of light, shining cold and indifferent to our existence. So, I said after a long pause, what's the real deal with you, Kellia? I mean, yeah, you're this legendary warrior, but why are you still here, doing this? She didn't respond at first, her gaze fixed on the instruments before her. The hum of the ship was the only sound between us. Then her voice was almost too quiet to hear. Because I have nothing else. I raised an eyebrow. Nothing else? Really? I mean, you've got the galaxy at your feet, right? What's stopping you from just walking away from it all? She was silent again, and for a moment I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then, almost reluctantly, she spoke. You think it's that simple? Her voice was a little rougher now, a little softer, like she wasn't sure whether to be vulnerable or annoyed. I leaned forward. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, but... Then don't, she snapped. You have no idea what it's like to be born into a life of bloodshed, to have your every breath be dedicated to a cause you didn't choose, to spend your entire existence fighting for a people who don't even understand what you've sacrificed. The rawness in her voice made the usual sarcasm feel incredibly out of place. I swallowed, feeling a little uncomfortable. Yeah, I said slowly. You're right. I don't get it. She turned her head, and for the first time since we met, I saw something like regret flash across her eyes. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same steely resolve. Exactly, so don't pretend you understand, because you don't. There was a long silence. I let out a breath. Fair enough, but that doesn't mean you can't still change things. You know? Her lips curled into a thin, almost cynical smile. Is that your great advice? Change things like that? She snapped her fingers for emphasis. I shrugged. What else are you going to do? Keep following the same old path? What's the point of all that fighting if you don't ever take a step back and ask why you're doing it? Kelly's gaze hardened again, and she turned away. I don't need your philosophy lessons, human. I raised my hands in mock surrender. All right. Just thought I'd throw it out there. She didn't reply, but after a while I noticed that her hands had stopped moving in such an aggressive, mechanical manner. She seemed almost lost in thought. I smiled to myself. I wasn't going to push her any further. Kelia was a complicated one, and I wasn't about to pretend I had any idea what was really going on inside her head. But if nothing else, I knew one thing for sure. We weren't finished yet. The next few hours passed uneventfully. The ship hummed along through the cold expanse of space, the stars becoming nothing more than distant memories as we made our way deeper into the nebula. Then, just as I thought we were on the verge of falling into a blissful routine of uneasy silence, the ship shuddered. I gripped the armrest. What was that? Kelia's fingers flew over the controls. A malfunction, nothing major. We'll be fine. Then the lights flickered, and the whole ship suddenly went dark. I blinked. Kelia, you sure about that nothing major thing? She didn't respond. I stood up, heart pounding, as the low hum of the engines died away entirely. The sound of air recycling stopped. The entire ship was silent, trapped in an eerie, unnatural stillness. The emergency lights kicked on, casting a red glow over the walls, but the usual sense of safety was gone. I could see the worry in Kelia's face as she worked furiously at the controls, trying and failing to bring the ship back to life. Not good, she muttered under her breath. I stepped forward. What's going on? Is it the stabilizer? She didn't answer right away, but then, in a voice I hadn't heard from her before, one that was tense and uncertain, she said, It's not the stabilizer. We've been hacked. I felt the blood drain from my face. Hacked? By who? But Kelia's expression was already colder than I had ever seen it before. By someone who knows exactly what they're doing. And just like that, I realized, things were about to get a whole lot worse. The red emergency lights cast everything in a sinister glow. The ship was silent, save for the occasional hum of a failing system, trying to keep the whole thing from falling apart. My heart was beating faster than it had any right to, and I had a growing suspicion that the only reason I wasn't panicking yet was because I was too busy trying to keep my mind from thinking about the fact that we were completely stranded in the middle of a space nebula, with a hacker messing with our systems, and nothing but an overly calm Kelia to look to for reassurance. I'm going to try something, Kelia said, her voice tight. It might not work, but it's the only chance we've got. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds promising. Not really. She punched a few buttons, her long fingers moving quickly over the console, but her face remained tight with concentration. The hack is deep. Whoever did this knows their stuff. If I try to reverse the hack, it might send us spiraling. Great. I leaned against the wall, folding my arms. Sounds like your kind of thing. You know, the we might die, but let's give it a shot anyway kind of thing. Kelia glanced over her shoulder, and for a split second, I caught a flicker of something in her expression. Was that a smile? No. It was just a brief moment of exhaustion, nothing more. But still, I couldn't resist a joke. You know, if you wanted to spend a romantic evening in a nebula, you could have just asked. I would have gone for the luxury resort personally, but I can make do with a gripping experience like this. She didn't even acknowledge me with more than a tiny eye roll, but there was a shift in her posture, slightly less tense, less rigid. Maybe I wasn't completely useless. I waited, drumming my fingers against the wall as she worked. So, who do you think did this? I asked after a long moment, trying to keep the conversation light. I mean, we're not exactly a prime target, right? Her eyes flicked over to me. Does it really matter who did it? I opened my mouth to reply, but she was already answering herself. The important part is that they have control of our systems now. They could send us into a star if they wanted to, or worse. She paused for a moment. The ones who hack like this don't stop at just a ship. My stomach churned. So, what are we dealing with here? A big-time syndicate? A rogue military group? She shook her head. Number worse. Someone with a personal interest in seeing me fail. I raised an eyebrow. You have enemies, Kelia? I'm shocked. She looked at me again, but this time there was no humor in her expression. I've made a lot of them human. Too many, to be honest. I leaned back against the wall. Any chance they'll let us not die? Kelia didn't respond immediately. Instead, she adjusted a few more controls, muttering under her breath. Why do I get the feeling this isn't the first time you've been in this situation? I said. You seem almost casual about it. She didn't answer, just kept working, her fingers moving with precision. I let the silence stretch for a few moments before I sighed. Okay, let's do this the easy way. You're Kelia the Terrible. You've had all kinds of people gunning for you, but I'm just a regular guy. What's the one thing you need me to do right now that will actually help? She finally glanced over at me again, almost as if noticing for the first time that I was still there. If you really want to help, she gave me a look. Hold that panel steady. I need to make sure the hack doesn't corrupt the drive core. I immediately went to work, unfastening the cover she pointed to and holding the panel in place. It was a tight fit, and the panel's wiring was hot, like someone had just tried to fry it to death. But I did as I was told, trying not to think about the potential consequences of failing. Kelia's voice cut through the tense silence again. And if you start thinking about how much this is probably a bad idea, then you're definitely not helping. Right. No pressure. I adjusted my grip, pushing back thoughts of what might happen if I slipped. Another moment passed, and I couldn't help but glance at her as she typed furiously. You're really good at this, I said, genuinely impressed despite myself. Kelia didn't look up. I've had a lot of practice. I nodded. Wouldn't have pegged you as a computer whiz, though. You don't exactly give off the I spend my free time programming vibe. She shot me a look. The universe doesn't give you a choice. You either learn to do this or you die. I raised my hands. Fair enough. Just know that if you make it out of here, I'm definitely taking you to that luxury resort. She smirked briefly but said nothing else. And for a long moment, the only sound was the clicking of keys and the occasional beep from the ship's systems. Then a low hum came from the core systems. Kelia's fingers froze. We're back, she said, voice almost triumphant. The hack's been removed. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And the ship's not going to explode? She looked at me like I was an idiot. Not unless you touch something you shouldn't. Right, got it. Keep your hands to yourself. I took a step back, gesturing to the newly operational console. So, what now? Kelia stepped forward, her fingers dancing over the controls. Now we get back on course. The Tempest Nebula isn't far, but first, we need to prepare for what's coming. I frowned. What's coming? You're telling me we're not done yet? She glanced at me, and this time, her expression was colder than I'd ever seen. The hack wasn't a coincidence. Someone's still watching us, and when we get to the nebula, they'll be waiting. I raised an eyebrow. Well, that's great news. Do we have time for a snack before we get killed? Kelia didn't smile. I'd take it as a personal favor if you didn't make jokes about our impending death right now. I gave her a thumbs up. I'm on it. No more jokes. For now. I sat back in my seat, a sense of unease settling in my chest. The hacker had been just the beginning, and whatever was waiting for us at the nebula, I had a bad feeling it was going to be worse than anything we'd faced so far. The Tempest Nebula was, as its name suggested, no peaceful retreat. It was a swirling mass of cosmic gas and dust, luminous clouds of ionized particles lit up by the energy of dying stars, and it felt like the universe itself was about to implode at any given moment. Our ship crept through the chaos like a reluctant moth drawn toward a dying flame. The engines hummed, still feeling a little too fragile after our little hacker incident. Kelia worked at the controls with her usual intensity, fingers flying over the keys as she kept one eye on the scanners. So, I said, breaking the silence that had settled between us, any chance we'll actually survive this? Or are we just dragging this out for dramatic effect? Kelia's lips quirked, though I could see the underlying fatigue in her posture. You always have to make it sound worse than it is. Gotta keep the mood light, I said, leaning back in my seat, arms behind my head. How else are we supposed to survive if we don't find a little humor in it? Her gaze flicked toward me, the faintest trace of amusement in her eyes. I could think of a few better ways to survive. Yeah, sure, but I'm not that brave. She didn't respond, but she didn't have to. Her eyes were fixed on the monitors as she navigated the dense nebula, clearly searching for something. I could feel it, the tension in the air, thick like smoke. Whatever was out there, waiting for us, had been lying in wait for far too long, and Kalia knew it. We had been through a lot together in the past few weeks, dodging bounty hunters, fixing broken technology, sharing stories and insults that didn't quite mask the growing bond between us. But none of that felt relevant now. Not when we were headed straight for a storm we couldn't see, but we knew was coming. "We'll be fine," I said, offering a grin that was a little more strained than I intended. "We've survived everything else so far. What's one more battle?" Kalia didn't answer. Instead, her fingers flew across the console, activating a series of defensive systems. I noticed the familiar tension in her shoulders again, the deep-rooted fear she'd tried to hide for so long. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice quieter now, the joking tone falling away. Kalia didn't look up. "I have no other choice." I thought about that for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. She was a warrior, one who had been fighting her whole life, fighting for a cause, fighting for survival, fighting for respect. But it had all come at a cost. I'd seen it in her eyes, in the way she carried herself. Every scar, every battle had left its mark. "And you still don't have a plan B?" I said, half teasing. "I mean, I thought you were supposed to be the expert at making impossible situations look easy." Kalia finally looked up at me, her gaze cutting through the tension. "My plan is to fight, human. I'm not here to make friends or find easy solutions." I swallowed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I really understood her. "Yeah, I get that." We were silent again, the weight of what was coming sinking in. The ship rumbled as it passed through the nebula's dense fog, and I could feel the strange hum of something close, dangerously close, just beyond the reaches of our scanners. And then, there it was, the ship. It appeared without warning, like it had materialized out of thin air. A sleek, shadowed vessel, half hidden in the swirls of gas and particles that made up the nebula. Its hull was covered in strange symbols. Alien, archaic. The same symbols that Kalia had worn on her armor when we first met. "That's them, isn't it?" I asked, feeling a pit form in my stomach. She didn't need to answer. Her eyes, dark and intense, told me everything. "It's them, the ones who want me dead." I turned toward the viewport, the realization dawning on me like a slow-motion crash. This wasn't just some random pirate or mercenary group. This was personal. Kalia had been marked, and now they were coming to collect. The other ship's engines flared to life, and suddenly there was no more space between us. The sensors went wild, and the alarms blared. Blasts of energy streaked across the expanse, slamming into our shields. "We don't have much time," Kalia muttered, tapping the controls to engage evasive maneuvers. "Hold on." "Yeah, no kidding," I said, gripping the side of the console. I glanced at Kalia, her focus unyielding, her expression fierce, determined. She had always carried herself with a sense of purpose, but now I could see the cracks in her armor. This wasn't about fighting for her people. This was about survival. "Look, Kalia," I said as the ship rocked with another hit. "There's always a way out of this. We'll think of something." She shot me a glance, and I could tell that she was considering something. "I don't need a way out," she said quietly. "I need to finish this." Before I could respond, the other ship fired again, this time at a much closer range. The shields sputtered under the impact, and I heard the distinct sound of metal creaking. The hull was taking damage. "You sure about this?" I asked again, feeling my voice grow tense, "because I'm starting to think we're about to be a permanent fixture in this nebula." Kalia's eyes locked with mine, and there was a flicker there, a quiet understanding. "You're not getting off that easily, human." I stared at her, caught off guard for a moment. But then a grin tugged at my lips. "Good to know. Guess we'll take this one step at a time." She nodded sharply, eyes flashing with fire. "Step 1, stay alive." Step 1 didn't go as planned. The enemy ship had cut through our defenses like a hot knife through butter, and the next few minutes were a blur. I remember the shuddering of the hull, the way the lights flickered out again, and how Kellia never once lost her composure. Even when the odds were stacked against us, even when it felt like everything was falling apart, she kept moving. She kept fighting. And then, just when I thought we were done for, something shifted. The ship shuddered one final time. Only this time, it wasn't from an attack. The ship's systems kicked back to life, as if by some miracle, and the weapons fired back at the enemy vessel with a force I didn't know we had. "We've got them," Kellia said, voice low, almost satisfied. I looked up and sure enough, the enemy ship was retreating. Their shields were down, their engines sputtering. Kellia exhaled slowly, as though she hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. "That was too close." I let out a breath of my own, half laughing in relief. "Well, that was fun. I almost had time to miss that giant space cloud of doom." Kellia shot me a look. "Not funny," I grinned, leaning back in my seat. "Right, got it. No jokes. But hey, we survived." The tension in the air had lifted, but it was replaced with something quieter, something unspoken. Kellia had done it. She'd survived the odds, and somehow so had I. As the stars stretched out before us once more, the ship steady and the danger finally passed, I realized something. For all her strength, for all the battles she'd fought, Kellia wasn't as invincible as I had once thought. She had her flaws, her weaknesses, but that was okay. We had made it through this, together, and in the end, that was enough. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "how about that luxury resort then?" Kellia's lips quirked, and I swear I saw a hint of a smile. "You're impossible." "Yeah, but you're stuck with me now." And for the first time in a long while, I didn't mind one bit.